This was the most advanced plane of the United States Navy when it entered service, a game changer in the mid-1930s. But the immense speed how aviation technology advanced before and during World War II made it completely obsolete in a few years. So today we will take a look at the Douglas TBD Devastator, what made it revolutionary and why it became obsolete so quickly. The US Navy in the early 1930s still used biplanes on its carriers, just like many other nations. The use of the carriers and the operation of their aircraft was very much experimental, as the first American carrier, the USS Langley, was only commissioned a decade earlier, in 1922. But in the 1930s, as aircraft designs changed, the Navy's interest turned towards the new faster monoplanes, just like it happened with the land-based aircrafts around the world at this time. The mid-1930s marked the turning point when the new all-metal monoplanes started to take over the role of the biplanes. The Navy at this time used the Great Lakes TG-2 and the Martin BM-1 types as torpedo bombers. They were both designed at the end of 1920s, and though there were plans to replace them, the presented newer biplanes didn't show a big improvement over these planes. So in 1934, the Bureau of Aeronautics set out new specifications for new carrier-based designs, for bombers and torpedo bombers. The requirements were the ability to carry the Mark 13 torpedo, or 1,000 pounds of bombs, and use the new Pratt & Whitney R1830 engine. The specifications not only asked for scout planes, dive bombers and torpedo bombers, but also allowed both biplane and monoplane designs to enter. The result was a confusing array of designs entered by many manufacturers. For the scout bomber, dive bomber specifications, Brewster entered their XSBA-1, Curtiss their XSBC-3, Great Lakes the XB-2G-1, Grumman the XSBF-1, Northrop the XBT-1, and finally Vought the XSB-2U-1. If you'd like to know more about the dive bombers, and especially the SBD Dauntless, which was developed from the Northrop XBT-1, I have already made a video on that plane, so go check it out. For the scout plane torpedo bomber specifications, the proposed designs were quite unique. Great Lakes entered their XTBG-1, which was a conventional biplane design with a very unconventional cockpit arrangement, a closed front cockpit for the torpedo aimer, and a rear one for the pilot and the gunner. Hall entered their XPTB-H2, which was a huge twin-engine float plane built entirely from aluminum. It had a length of 52 feet 11 inches and a wingspan of 79 feet 4 inches. Hall chose the float plane design because they aimed mainly for the scout role of the specifications. Though it met most of the requirements, being a float plane restricted its use, and in the end it wasn't ordered. And of course Douglas entered their XTBD-1, which eventually won the competition for the torpedo bomber role. This plane met all the Navy specifications and was ordered in June 1934, and the prototype made its maiden flight less than a year later in April 1935. In the following months it went through flight, bombing and torpedo trials for evaluation. So what made the Devastator so revolutionary when it appeared? It was the first American carrier-based monoplane, the first all-metal naval aircraft, and the first with hydraulic folding wings, a huge leap from the former biplane designs. It was almost twice as fast as the former TG-2, which only had a maximum speed of 114 miles an hour, and it was more than 50 miles an hour faster than the Martin BM-1. It also featured a fully enclosed cockpit for the 3-man crew, and a retractable undercarriage, which by design wasn't retracted fully, but stayed 10 inches exposed. Since the TBD could carry out both torpedo or horizontal bombing attacks, the third crew member was the bombardier, sitting behind the pilot. During bomb runs, the bombardier had to lay down under the pilot, where a bomb aiming window was positioned with a bomb sight. The test for the new torpedo bomber ended in November, and only a few modifications were requested. The original flat canopy was changed to a higher dome one to improve visibility, and improvements were made on the engine, which was changed to a newer model developing 900 horsepower. Also, the engine cowlings became smoother. In December, the type started its carrier trials, which were also passed during the month, and in early 1936, an order for 129 TBD-1 torpedo bombers were placed, and the first production aircraft was delivered in 1937. Normally we would talk about the variants of the plane, but unlike most World War II designs, the TBD was only built in one main variant. The exception was the original TBD-1 test model, which later in 1939 was tested as a float plane, becoming the TBD-1A. And it went through many trials, but eventually the idea was scrapped. The TBD-1 was 35 feet long, with a wingspan of 50 feet. It had an empty weight of 5,600 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 9,289 pounds. The plane used the Pratt & Whitney R1830 14-cylinder engine, developing 900 horsepower. It was not a fast plane with just 206 miles an hour maximum speed. It had a range of 435 miles when equipped with a torpedo, or 716 miles when carrying bombs. The service ceiling of the plane was 19,500 feet. Its armament consisted of one forward-firing 30 or 50 caliber machine gun and one 30 caliber machine gun in the rear. It could carry either one Mark 13 torpedo or 1,000 pounds of bombs. The TBD entered service in 1937, and it made a good impression at first with its modern design. Torpedo Squadron 3 on USS Saratoga was the first to receive the new TBDs in November 1937, and Torpedo Squadron 2 on Lexington received them in January 1938. But the conversion to the new plane from the old biplanes was not that smooth for the pilots. A much bigger, much faster plane with higher stall speed resulted in several accidents, and in a year about 20 of the new torpedo bombers were lost. It was the main torpedo bomber of the US Navy when World War II broke out, but in 1940 there were already signs that it started to become obsolete. The Japanese Navy fielded the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, which were more than 100 miles an hour faster than the TBD. The 206 miles an hour maximum speed, which in 1937 was considered great, by 1940 suddenly became a snail's pace, thanks to the giant leaps in aviation technology. The work on its replacement already started in 1939, but the new TBF Avenger had a problematic development, and it took years to enter service and only appeared in 1942. You can learn more about that plane in my earlier TBF Avenger video, so if you're interested in that plane, go check it out. In December 1941, at the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, when the US entered the war, 100 of these planes were in service on different carriers. In the first clashes with the Japanese Navy, the planes did well, bombed installations during the raids on the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, and attacked Japanese ships at New Guinea. They again were moderately successful in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first carrier battle on the Pacific, participating in the sinking of the Japanese carrier Shoho on 7th of May. On the next day they attacked the other Japanese carrier Shoikaku, but this time all of their Mark 13 torpedoes missed the target or failed to explode. The problems with these torpedoes were not new. The Mark 13 torpedo was well known for its problems. Many times they didn't detonate when hitting a target, or just plain steered away, and they usually run 10-15 feet deeper than expected. As it turned out later, during the testing the dummy warheads on the torpedoes were just filled with water, instead of a correct ballast weight to imitate the actual warhead. At first the Bureau of Ordnance denied the torpedo had any problems, but after the persistence from the submarine crews, eventually the problems were solved. But this took a long time, and didn't help the torpedo planes, who had to use faulty torpedoes in the meantime. In June 1942, they participated in the Battle of Midway, where 41 Devastators were used against the Japanese fleet. Sadly, due to lack of communication and rush, the air groups lost contact with each other, and the torpedo bombers, their fighter cover, and the dive bombers or reach the enemy fleet at different times. Many of the torpedo bombers couldn't even reach their target, as some 10-15 miles out they came under attack by Japanese fighters. The ones who made it to the Japanese fleet were unsuccessful as well. The slow and weakly armed TBDs were no match for the Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns, especially as their torpedoes had to be released below 150 miles an hour, making the torpedo bombers sitting ducks during their attack run. WT-8 was the first of them to reach the Japanese fleet at 9:20 in the morning, but attacking without fighter cover, all 15 planes were shot down. WT-6 arrived at 11:20, and they too come under fighter attacks and anti-aircraft fire, and lost 9 from the 14 aircraft, without scoring any hits. Though WT-3 arrived together with the fighters and dive bombers from Yorktown, but when they attacked, their 12 TBDs suffered the same fate. The slow torpedo bombers closing at just 120 miles an hour were slaughtered by the Japanese fighters, and lost 10 from the 12 planes. From the 41 TBDs launched against the Japanese fleet, only 4 made it back to the carriers. But their sacrifice was not in vain, as they distracted the air defenses, and the Japanese fighters jumping on the easy prey dropped their altitude to attack them, allowing the dive bombers arriving at high altitude to start their attack runs on the Japanese carriers. After the Battle of Midway, the TBDs made one last combat sortie against 2 Japanese cruisers. After that, they were withdrawn from the front line. They stayed in service as training and patrol aircraft for more than 2 years, and the last of them was scrapped in November 1944. To be fair to the type, their replacement, the TBF Avenger, didn't fare much better at first, as it was plagued with problems, and the traditional torpedo runs weren't really successful until later in the war, when the new, more reliable torpedoes arrived and the US fully dominated in the air. The Douglas TBD Devastator is a great example how fast the aviation technology advanced in the late 1930s, and especially during World War II. The plane that first flew in 1935 and entered service in 1937 as a state-of-the-art modern torpedo bomber, 3 years later was obsolete, and by the time it started to see combat, it was completely outclassed by newer designs. Its failure had many reasons: the quick advancement of plane design, the American planners, who falsely thought the Japanese only had inferior copies of European planes, and the fact that the low, slow torpedo attack concept itself became obsolete during World War II. Nonetheless, the TBD had successful combat sorties, and although it failed in the Battle of Midway, that was not entirely just the plane's fault. Though it was obsolete by the time it saw action, the success rate of the type could have been much better if the crews get better training, and they can go to combat with actually working torpedoes and better coordination. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.